Today we're going to be tying up a really effective dry fly pattern. It's called the Purple Haze, and the reason it's called that will make a lot of sense to you probably momentarily, if not already, because we're dyeing with purple thread. It's going to have a purple body. It's going to have a parachute and then a hackle around the parachute. So I, as usual, approach this with some certain level of trepidation, just because I don't tie enough dry flies to feel overly confident, but I'm making some progress little by little. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and start out with a tail, and for tailing material I'm just using a piece of Coq de Leon. This stuff, it's very stiff fibers, does a great job for tailing on patterns. So I've already grabbed myself a small bunch of those. I want them just a little bit longer than the shank of the hook, so that's how I'm going to kind of get my measurement. Be about like that. And I'm just going to take a couple of loose wraps there. That allows me to kind of make some adjustments. You can see how long out that is, and that's much longer than what I want, so I can actually pull those fibers with my fingers over here back to about where I want them to be. And then I'm going to turn my thread a little bit counterclockwise. There are several reasons to do that. In this particular case, I'm doing it so that my thread is a little bit more flattened out, so I don't end up with as much bulk back here. This pattern calls for quite a bit of material, so it's very easy for this thing to bulk up on you. And it's going to have a little bit of a taper, but we're going to work on that taper a little bit later. Right now, let's go ahead and cut the butt ends off of our Coq de Leon. And we should be pretty much in business. I'm just going to move my thread up to about the 1/3 point, which is where I'm going to want to tie in my wing. Or more appropriately, for the parachute, I'm going to just turn to some calf body hair. And I found that, personally, I really like, if I'm going to do a post with a parachute, I really like using this material. So I've got my hair stacker, a little bunch of hair I've already prepared. I've cut it off. I've combed out any extras and some under hair. We're just going to stack it. So once I've got it stacked here, I'm just going to turn my stacker this way, and this will just pivot straight down. And hopefully you can see we've got a really nice, straight, evened up bunch of this calf body fur. So right now I'm just looking for measurement. Measurement wise, I want this to be about the length of the shank of the hook. So I'm going to turn my thread counterclockwise here, but this time not so much to keep the thread flat, but because I want this thread to jump back towards my fingers when I tie this little clump in. And you'll see that that's exactly what it does, and that's what I wanted it to do. I'm not going to pull really tight down. I'm going to pull the tightness more on an upward direction to keep that calf body hair from spinning around on me too much. Then I'm going to take some fairly tight thread wraps backwards. And you'll note that I've got my fingers completely in the way. But there's a reason for that. I want to keep the butt ends of that calf hair in my fingers because it'll make it much easier when I come in here and clip it with my scissors. So now that I've got that clipped off, I'm going to go ahead and take some fairly tight thread wraps back until I'm back onto the thread, the purple thread. And that's just going to help me hold this in place. The other thing I'm going to do to try to hold this in place a little bit is I'm going to add just a smidgen of head cement here, right on these wraps at the very top. And I don't need a lot of it. I'll do this a couple of times. You'll see as we tie this pattern, and it just solidifies some things that can very easily become unsolidified. I've got that big gob on the top, so I want to go ahead and kind of spread that out a little bit. And with that spread out, I'm going to bring my thread back up, pulling tight. Not so tight I'm going to break my thread, but tight enough that I'm not creating too much extra bulk. Once I get up to here, I'm going to take those fibers. I'm going to work on trying to pull as many of those backwards as I can, and then I'm going to take some jam wraps right underneath where that calf hair post or parachute or wing or whatever you might want to call it. And you see that's going to help us get that to stand straight up. I'm going to take a wrap over the top of my hook. I'm not going to take it all the way around because I'm going to actually try to grab those hairs from the calf. And I'm going to start winding my way up, almost like the bit of hair there, that calf body hair, is kind of like the shank of the hook, really. I'm going to just post this up because this is what my hackle is going to wrap around. Once I get it about there, I can go ahead and take a couple of wraps just to make sure I've got my thread locked in place. So now that I've got my post in place, we're going to go ahead and turn to, I've got some Coachman Brown Barred Grizzly hackle here. I've already pulled myself out a fiber, or a feather here. And we're going to secure this to the post, not to the shank of the hook, but to the post. I'm going to start out by attaching this hackle fiber. And I want to attach that to the post, not to the shaft of the hook. So I'm going to take a wrap or two around it. I've found that that's easier for me anyway. And then I'm going to gauge it because where those fibers start, I want them to start right at the top of this post here. So I'm going to go ahead, since I've only taken a couple of wraps, I can go ahead and pull this up just a little bit. And with that up there like that, now I can work my way back up to the top of the post here. And it's going to be securing our hackle feather to the post itself, which is really important since with a parachute like this, our hackle is going to be wrapping around this post rather than what we're used to, which is wrapping around the shank of the hook. So now I'm just working my way back down. Now that I've got that hackle in place about where I want it. Just about like that. We'll go ahead and get ourselves back on the hook itself. I still have that stem there, so it's going to take a few wraps forward just to help me lock that stem in place, and it's not going to take too many wraps. I'll go ahead and turn my vise upside down here so I have access to that stem so I can cut it off. Just like that, and we are pretty close to being in business here. I'm going to take my thread right back under that wing, and then I'm going to jump it over to the other side of that wing. I'll take a couple of wraps back. The other thing that I like to do here is I'm going to add just once more a little bit of glue onto the post this time. As I work on the dubbing and the back end of the fly, this will begin to dry a little bit. So I've got everything kind of ready, in line, ready to go now. So I'm going to take my thread back towards the tail. See, I've got a great big drop off here, and that's just from the body hair from the calf. So I'm going to just add a couple of wraps there to just kind of taper that a little bit, clean that up a little bit. And I will continue to spin my thread a little bit counterclockwise just to flatten it out. It'll help us get that nice taper without building up quite as much bulk. And with that, I'm just going to go ahead and head back down. So for the dubbing, I'm just going to turn to some purple hairline purple dubbing. I've got a little bunch of it here. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of align those fibers so that they're running in one direction. That will just help us get that material nice and tight, which is what we're looking for. And with this, I'm just going to finger dub it right on. So I want it much tighter, closer to the hook, because that's where I want to have the lowest profile here. If there are guard hairs that are poking out all over, don't worry about that. That's what scissors are for. But I will work on continuing to tighten this up as I move my way up our hook here. And we do want that taper, so I'll take a few overlapping wraps as we get up closer to this post, continuing to tighten that material. And once I get up to the post, we'll go ahead and take a wrap or two on the back side, or the hook, by the eye of the hook. That's what I should say. And sometimes it'll slip on you, that's fine. So that's going to do me pretty well. Go ahead and take a few thread wraps here at the very front. So cleaned it up just a little bit. I'm going to work on just taking a few thread wraps here around the eye. Not only to clean things up, but to build up just a tiny little hint of a head here. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and grab my whip finisher. And when you're doing your whip finishing, you know, I do want a wrap or two right behind the eye. But the bulk of the wraps I want up towards the post, because that's how you want the head to be. It's a little bit thicker as it moves back rather than thick at the eye. With a couple of thread wraps like that, I'm just going to go ahead and tighten. And with that, I'll turn my vise sideways, cut my thread off. From here, what I found is really a lot easier is to go ahead and take your hook I'm going to position it just like that. And once I've got my hook kind of situated like that, don't forget this step. This was a step that I tend to forget from time to time, is I've got to reattach my hook, my line, my thread to my hook. And I'm going to reattach it just like I do if I were tying on the shank of the hook. So I'm just tying up and then back over itself. And with that, I should be able to come in safely and cut the thread off here. Grab myself my hackle pliers and attach to that feather there, that hackle. Then I'm just going to take touching turns, moving down towards the base of that post. Maybe one more. Sometimes I get greedy, and that's not always a good thing. I'm going to kind of release my thread now, keeping the tension on that hackle fiber not so hard that it's going to break. But I also don't want it to come unwound. So we're going to go ahead and take wraps, trying to avoid those fibers there. Once you've got a couple of wraps on it, you should be able to let your hackle pliers go. I'm going to leave the hook in this kind of angle, at least for a moment longer, while I go in and try to snip off the balance of this hackle fiber. Trying to be as careful as possible that I don't cut a lot of the fibers that I've got in place already. We should be able to grab our whip finisher again, and we're going to whip finish with the fly in this kind of position. But once again, I do want to go underneath of the fibers that we have just tied in. Pull that nice and tight. And now I should be able to come right on in with my cutter. We'll go ahead and cut that thread out. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and release on my vise, and we're going to go ahead and reposition this back to its normal position here. And not a lot of cleanup necessarily this time involved, but there you go. Here's the Purple Haze. See the nice parachute on that. That'll just help you see it in the water. That purple is going to be really hard to see when it's laying on the surface of the water. But with our nice white parachute in place out of the calf body here, it'll be much easier to see on the water. So grab yourself a hook, throw it in your vise, and have fun.